scandal is swirling in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Border Patrol shooting incident that left Alex Pretti, the left-wing protester, dead, has sparked a huge debate. We'll be looking over the footage and talking about exactly what it means for the future of deportations. All that and more on this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez. So it's another week and another point of vindication for my long-running thesis that the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota is cursed. And if we look back from George Floyd 2020 to, the whole disaster around Tim Walz and now Somali fraud and now these anti-ICE protests, I mean, would you agree, is Minneapolis the most cursed city in the union?
I would say, yeah, certainly from my perspective on the right over here. I don't know how the left feels about Minneapolis. They may see it as like the last safe haven for, the things they're trying to accomplish vis-a-vis the rest of the country, alongside maybe like Portland and Seattle. But Minnesota seems unique. I mean, of course, there's like liberal cities. There's liberal sort of progressive strongholds elsewhere. But also, don't forget Tim Walz. He was sort of the representative of a certain kind of progressivism that was supposed to appeal to mainstream Americans. And he's a representative of this place, of the city. I guess the question I have is why is Minneapolis seem to be the place where all of these pathologies have sort of accumulated and expressed themselves over the last, let's say, 10 years. I mean, like we said, there are these other liberal places in the country. There are other progressive cities. Is it uniquely bad relative to, let's say, San Francisco? And maybe the disconnect here, maybe I'm answering my own question. I'll let you answer. But the disconnect is something like we expect something else from Minnesota because it's in the Midwest. Like we already have baked into our psyche what Portland is, what Seattle is, what San Francisco is. We kind of knew Minneapolis was like a liberal place, but a different kind of liberal place, a Midwest liberal place, a more modest liberal place, a more centrist liberal place. I mean, that's wrong. Going back all the way to the 60s, I think it's pretty clear. Minnesota has always had this underlying, very deep sort of socialist/communist sort of roots. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but I think it is sort of a surprise to people. Okay, I'm rambling a bit here. What is it about Minneapolis that makes it so cursed? Why has it taken on this particular character?
Yeah, and why are Portland and Seattle feeling so jealous at all the attention? Another interesting angle, and I don't have a comprehensive theory about this, but if you look at the history of Seattle, the history of Minneapolis, there's a lot of overlap. And so there's a strong organized labor element to it. International workers of the world almost 100 years ago, communist sympathizers, different kind of industrial frontier progressivism. And there's also a high density of Scandinavian populations. And so there's something about these Scandinavian transplant cultures that has this kind of simultaneously this over empathization. So bring in as many Somalis as you can. Don't ask any rude questions about what they might be up to, but also this more militant, socialistic, progressive, activist element. And I think you get both of these living together, and then you have a confluence of events with Tim Walz being elected. And what's so funny is, Walz was elected as this symbol of rugged, traditional, fix your truck engine masculinity, which could not
Football
be further
coach.
from the reality of who he is or the polity that he governs. So we'll put a pin in our grand theory of Minnesota, but I'm really curious to get your take, and I don't know where you're going to go with it, on the shooting death of anti-ICE activist and peaceful nurse Alex Pretti. Give me like your basic take after having reflected on this for the week.
Okay, I have thought about this for the full week, and you're asking me this as if I have like a prepared response. I don't. I knew we were going to talk about this, of course, and there's a million different directions we could go with this. I guess, so one thing I'm asking myself is, okay, we're like, this is a bit like breaking the fourth wall here, but like you're on a podcast, okay? So like the idea is, are we supposed to provide some like new novel take that has yet to be articulated elsewhere? And then if so, what is the new novel take on this? And I'm kind of like, does it even matter? Like, should we even bother going down that road? Do we take this wide angle view and talk about the sort of meta politics here and what's underlying this? Do we narrowly focus on the specific incident in the like frame by frame, second by second, play by play of what happened? Okay. Or do you just...
Let's do both. Let's do both.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Or and sometimes it's just our job too to just like summarize what is the prevailing sort of thesis here. How do you digest and metabolize an episode like this? Because obviously it's front of mind, and the thing is that it has this symbolic importance, obviously, but actually, the question is like, does it matter for the larger question of what is to be done about ICE and deportations and immigration policy in this country? Or is it just totally divorced from that? And are we making a mistake from a narrative perspective by trying to somehow impart meaning on this thing and on this event as if there is some relevant sort of implicit value as it relates to deportations and immigration? Actually, I think the answer is no. In the same way, for example, that going back to what's Minnesota, George Floyd and what happened with Derek Chauvin, does that have anything at all to do with policing in this country and like race relations? And the answer is no. Actually, it doesn't. And at least I don't think it does. And we're like grafting meaning onto this thing for the lack of something else to talk about. Okay, now,
let me interrupt and take the other position then.
Okay, yeah.
I think actually it does. And I think more specifically, maybe what you're trying to get at is, should it have an influence on how we think about policing? The answer is probably no. These are instances that occur. The Floyd incident was at best ambiguous. There was a whole host of circumstances, on both sides of the argument. I think that's very similar to the Alex Pretti shooting. But whether it should be this grand symbol of how we think about policing, yeah, probably not. But it is, and the left is exceedingly good at turning these kind of small symbolic events into these grand political narratives. And it's almost like whether or not we should think about George Floyd as a big symbol, he became a big symbol. And so you have to think about it. And I think you have to then get in the arena, and you have to get in the arena, frankly, with some difficult stuff, right? This isn't when someone dies in police custody, when someone dies in a police shooting, unless they're, charging at them with a knife, if there's some ambiguity to it, I get conservatives hesitate, right? I want to back off. I don't want to discuss this. But I think you actually have to then really figure out your principles, do the analysis, and take a position, because the left is going to try to turn it into a kind of heroic martyrdom story.
Okay, that is true. And I agree that you have to participate in it. You can't just say, well, we're not going to talk about it, because then you just, the left gets to own this story, and it becomes a kind of narrative symbol for the thing they actually want to talk about, which is, the legitimacy of ICE and immigration. And you can use this. So this is this bad thing that is a inevitable consequence of this other bad thing you're doing. And because of this bad consequence, then it delegitimizes the thing that gave rise to this bad event. Whereas actually, the truth is that this bad event is incidental. This is what happens in a situation where you have police doing something that people don't want them to do. And in this case, it's like deporting people. What does that entail? That entails like extracting people from their homes. Like any police work, if it was easy, if it was simple, if the subjects of that police work were compliant, police wouldn't need to carry guns. Okay, we could do this seamlessly, but they do have to carry guns because people resist these efforts. They don't want to follow the law. They are non-compliant. They don't want to face the consequences of the thing they've done, which in this case is illegally crossing the border and coming into this country where they don't have the legal right to be here. Okay, so what is this all getting to? I'm like trying to find some angle to approach this topic that isn't just simply, look, the guy was obviously an aggressive sort of combatant in this kinetic conflict between the legal force of ICE agents, and he was intentionally trying to impede and interfere with that police work. In the course of that interference, which we saw from this video where he's kicking the car and spitting on agents, and is certainly not there just to sort of peacefully protest. He's there to get in. This is the most charitable version. If he's not there to cause harm, he's there to push as far as he can to provoke the officers into some kind of counteraction, and was saying to the officers on camera, assault me, assault me. Okay, this is what he wanted. He wanted to, in some sense, martyr himself, if not by dying, certainly by suffering at the hands of these agents. And so he got what he was looking for. Now, again, and I find this like tragic, not because I feel sorry for him. I don't want to have a situation where people like him are given proximity to these agents where they can provoke them in that way and force the kind of confrontation that he forced, where these agents are going to have to choose from a number of bad choices. And they're trying to choose from the least bad choice, okay? They have no good choices here because they have to assume his bad intentions. That's clear to me. So the entity or person or force or impulse that is responsible for the production of this scenario, this bad scenario, is the municipal agents, the municipal officers of the city of Minneapolis, who have abdicated their responsibility to keep peace and order. They've abdicated their responsibility to prudently and with forbearance assist with the legal efforts of the federal agents, and at the same time prevent their own people from interfering with those activities, while also, and this is, I do believe in the First Amendment, you have a right to oppose rhetorically these actions and say your piece, but there's a limit on that. Obviously, the moment that elevates to the level of active interference, the whole dynamic changes there. And so the police officers in Minneapolis, their agents are responsible for assisting ICE and also preserving this limited right for their own citizens to protest. And of course, they abdicated that responsibility, and what we got was the result here. Now, I will just finally say, to me, none of this has really that much bearing at all on the underlying question of ICE, deportations, and immigration policy. I just think these are separate things.
Yeah. Yes and no. I think, again, they should be separate, but you actually have to do some work to separate them in the public mind, because
True.
Again, the left is very good at making these outlier events symbolic of the whole. And so you have to explain to people why this is an outlier. And you also have to explain to people, as you've done, why did this happen? What is the totality of circumstances that led to this outcome, the shooting death of this, protester? And another interesting part of this story for me, as I was watching it, and really kind of at the beginning, obsessively watching these video clips over and over and over, scrubbing them in slow motion. You know, I worked as a film editor for many years. And so I'm kind of looking at the footage, I'm scrubbing it, I'm listening to the audio, I'm looking for gesture, movement, sight lines. And then what's really interesting is that new video clips start to emerge. So you get a 360-degree picture of this incident. And it reminded me of that Akira Kurosawa film, Rashomon. And the trope of Rashomon is that you get this story told from multiple perspectives over the course of the film, and then none of them appear to be revealing the whole truth. And they sometimes corroborate one another, sometimes conflict in one another, but you create this complex and ambiguous picture that is ultimately unresolved. And I think there's an element of that to the Pretti shooting. From one angle, there's a woman in pink on the other side of the street filming it. And when you watch it quickly, it looks pretty ugly. You see the scrum, you see the officer pull back, and then boom, 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 fire shots. The officers pull further back, fire additional shots. And so you could see how an average viewer who's watching this, who's pre-programmed towards thinking that this is an incident of police brutality or ICE fascism, could just say, okay, opinion confirmed. Then you get another angle that shows him illegally directing traffic to impede federal law enforcement, interfering with the shouting at the law enforcement, trying to intimidate them, interfering with what looks like they're detaining a woman. He puts his hands on one of the agents to try to block the agent from going forth and pushing down or detaining or arresting this woman. And then he starts grappling with them, all of which you cannot do. And then you see, there's a gun. The gun changes everything. Then you see the other angle where you get you see the officer that has disarmed him at some point. And then you hear them, he's got a gun, 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 gun. And then you hear pop, the first shot. And to this day, we don't know if that first shot was an accidental misfire from the gun that had been disarmed, or if it was one of the officers. And so, and then you get further evidence of him actually, assaulting officers, kicking their taillight out, demanding that he be assaulted. So you get his state of mind, his psychology. And you put all of these together, and it seems clear, in my view, whatever the legal and technical determination about good shoot, bad shoot, I think it's very clear that this was an agitated person seeking violent confrontation with police. He went in both instances armed with a gun, and he was, I think it'd be too much to say he had a death wish. This was not an explicit suicide by cop.
No,
but he's getting close to that because a prudent person, and again, this isn't a kid. He was, I think, 37 years old. A prudent person would say, hey, if I'm going to go do this and this and this. He apparently had his ribs broken in the first encounter. He goes back and is grappling with them again. This is not a heroic, peaceful nurse. This is someone who is seeking, again, armed confrontation with an armed opponent. And it's only a matter of time before someone is pulling the gun.
Well, okay, what I will say, like, heroic is in the eye of the beholder, because, he thought of himself, and the people calling him a hero think of themselves and think of this situation as armed conflict, okay? That this is effectively a war zone. That was said, by the way, that exact language was used by one of the, what was her name? Rachel Sayre. Okay, we might have to fact check that. But she's the manager of the city of Minneapolis, who called this a war zone, effectively a war zone. There was a guy on NPR this morning. Okay, they did this thing where they went around to the local diners. The guy running a diner. This is a war zone. The people in Minnesota are thinking about this as wartime event. They are treating themselves as combatants. And in fact, however kind of ludicrous that is, may think that's absurd. You have to take them seriously when they say that and think that. And the officers, certainly the ICE officers, have to take that seriously. They have to take, or if not seriously, as Peter Thiel once said, they do have to take it literally. These people think of it literally as a war zone, are acting as combatants in a war zone, and need to be treated as such. And when you have an armed enemy combatant who's aggressively sort of posturing and interfering and getting physical with you, you have to assume the worst there, okay? And again, it's incredibly tragic in some sense because of the larger circumstances, but there's nothing that I don't think is at all untoward about what happened there. Now, to me, though, again, like I want to pose this question to you because it gets to the point I was trying to make, however clumsily, earlier. Let's assume we didn't have that footage. Let's assume that footage that we got in the last few days never came out. Let's take the hard version of this, that it's like even more ambiguous than it was initially, that we don't really have a clear picture. And maybe this is like just on the line. Okay, what then? I mean, it's like the two sides are treating this like, it's like a football game and there's like a touchdown in the end zone and we're rewinding the tape to see if the guy held on to control long enough when he hit the ground and then he fumbles. It's like, is this about like scoring points? I mean, I get the answer is yes, it is. Like we are sort of doing this accumulative point scoring as like a narrative matter. But actually, again, it's like if it was resolved in the other direction, in other words, if some counterfactual where the video came out in the last few days that pointed in the other direction, that it actually like was a catch when the guy hit the ground, well, then what? Like, would our posture or position change relative to the underlying question of what to do about ICE and deportations? And to me, the answer is no. Actually, it doesn't matter. And this is kind of the point I'm trying to make here, which is, I guess, what we want to signal, what the administration wants to signal to these ICE agents is, look, we are going to apply the maximum charitable interpretation of anything that happens in any of these events as it relates to, your interactions with protesters, because we recognize that these are impossible circumstances. You have this incredibly difficult job, and there's been this dereliction on the part of the host city here, of the municipality, to support these efforts. And so we got your back. Okay, and that's what the administration is saying here. We got your back. We also want to, though, signal that deportations are going to happen. And if there is resistance from these cities, it's going to create bad circumstances that can't be helped. Okay, these agents are not out looking for blood. That's perfectly clear here. They are being presented with impossible circumstances where they have to act quickly. And they have to, again, assume the worst of the people they're interacting with, because the people they're interacting with are sort of rhetorically maximally antagonistic towards them. But in either case, like, and this is the thing that I saw from, some right-wing influencer types. I think Megyn Kelly said this, and she got a lot of pushback, but it was like, we should leave Minnesota. It's like, no. That's giving up the fight here based on some kind of like narrative fight over this incidental, and to my mind, incident. And so I just don't want us going down this path where you are required to win the argument on these ancillary things that happen in order to pursue the larger like ICE activity, in order to pursue immigration, in order to pursue deportations. I think sometimes we get distracted by these incidents.
We'll be back to this episode, but first we want to talk about something that is very shiny, very good, very valuable: gold.
Gold is mooning, Chris. Metals, precious metals, the market keeps going up. This bull run is only beginning. As everybody knows, our national debt is a mess. There's all sorts of international turmoil over currencies, and gold has always been, for as long as civilization has been around, the store of value amidst the chaos, and there is no better place to buy your gold than Birch Gold.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it should be part of your portfolio. It's a great hedge, not only against inflation, but a potential debt crisis. So make it part of your portfolio. If you want to get started with Birch Gold, great people, great Americans, just text Rufo to 989898. That's Rufo to 989898. They'll send you all the information you need to get started with gold. That's probably right, but I think that you have to figure out what are you measuring. And so I sense in your frustrations, you're saying, hey, I'm measuring this against the overall kind of justice of the cause of deportation, which was democratically selected as a policy. Trump has a mandate for this.
Correct.
And on the idea of the policy itself. And so this, let's say, incidental incident does not invalidate the policy as a whole. The policy as a whole must move forward towards its ideal form. Yes. And to the extent that those things become separated, you're feeling frustration. But I think that there's maybe a mistake there. And I don't think you can, I think the correct measurement also has to take into account public opinion. So this goes way back, founding fathers. I believe it was James Madison. He said, public opinion is the true sovereign. And before television, before Twitter, before, high-speed video. And the idea there is a pretty profound one. And he's arguing in essence that the fight in a democratic polity is a fight over public opinion. And when you lose public opinion, no amount of government force can make up that gap. Public opinion ultimately is the ruler. And so I think the Trump administration, while they shouldn't panic, while they shouldn't pull out of Minnesota, in a sense rewarding the rioters, the lawbreakers, the vandals, the agitators, I think they do have an obligation to take public opinion into account. And so when Tom Homan is now coming in, and I think Tom Homan is great, Tom Homan, much better than Kristi Noem as a administrator, as a spokesman, as a quarterback for this cause. I think even Homan has recognized we have to take public opinion into account. We have to adjust our strategy so that these chance events are reduced to a very low probability. And so ultimately, I think these things do matter. You have to play the probability game, and you want to have a strategy that minimizes the probability of a spectacular, violent event, or minimizes the probability of visuals of chaos, destruction, and rioting, all of which play against the president's popularity, play against ICE's popularity, and ultimately, if not managed sufficiently, could undermine that ideal cause. And so to me, it's 3 dimensions rather than 2 dimensions. Yeah. And even though we wouldn't like it to be that way, the fact is that the left is very smart. These people are not dumb. I mean, the people are dumb at the bottom who are manipulated into it, but the people who are running these movements, they understand that the principle of like synecdoche, right? Or metonymy, where like take that tiny incident and then cast the connotation on the whole. And look, that's politics. You have to deal with it.
Okay, I agree, but I think there may be some disagreement about just how much this incident matters and how long it's salient and what the appropriate sort of counter narrative act is here in response to the perception of chaos which this creates. And I agree that that is what matters. It's not actually, again, it's like not the specifics of the incident. It's the perception of not being in control. It's the perception of chaos. It's the perception of illegitimacy. And so, you quoted me James Madison, so I had to go find this quote from George Washington. And so this is a quote from George Washington. Are you
one-upping me with George Washington quotes now, buddy?
There's some disagreement about this point. And this was in this was during the height of Shays' Rebellion, and this was right before Washington put down the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay. So the larger point, so I'm just going to read a very brief, this was a letter written to the governor of Virginia, Henry Lee III, who, look up one of his children. It adds a little bit of texture and color to this. Okay, you talk, my good sir, of employing influence, the public influence, to appease the present tumults in Massachusetts. I know not where that influence is to be found, or, if attainable, that it would be a proper remedy for the disorders. Influence is not government. Okay, so I think the takeaway point here that Washington would say is just ignore for now, or not ignore, but that sense of perception, of influence, of the sort of public opinion, while perhaps worth taking into account, is not the substrate for good governance. And good governance here is about establishing order, okay? And over a long enough time horizon, I mean, these things get forgotten. The details get forgotten. People will sort of not, by the way, because the counter argument here is something like, well, what about what happened in Dallas? Do you remember what happened in Dallas at the ICE facility? Do you remember the guy's name who was up on the roof with a sniper rifle?
Don't remember.
Of course not. Okay, we don't remember these things. It was John, Jahn.
That's
but
right.
This guy with the sniper rifle, okay, and he's shooting at ICE agents, and there's like anti-ICE messaging on the bullet casings that they found, and there was an anti-ICE memo that they found. Does that invalidate the left sort of protests against this? No, of course not. Now, I don't want to get into this like asymmetry and they can do certain things and why can't we do the same thing? We're different. The left and right is different and we just have to exist within that reality. The point I'm making though is that people forget. People forget. And what matters at the end of all of this is the perception of order, the perception of legitimacy. And so I think interrogating and combing over in such fine detail this like frame by frame analysis of what happened in the shooting is actually not that important. And what we need to maintain from a narrative perspective is what constitutes order and who is responsible for disorder here. I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing too much, actually, now that I'm sort of like talking through it. I think it's just a question of emphasis.
Yeah. I'll kind of revise and maybe assimilate your point and George Washington's point. Sometimes statesmanship means going against public opinion in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, the long-term sustainability of a politician or a political regime does depend on public opinion. So those things are not totally in opposition, but they're sometimes in tension. Yeah. And so in this particular case, I think you have to kind of incapacitate the low-level insurgency in Minneapolis. You have to exert federal legitimate state control over the streets. You have to stop the disorder. But then in the long term, I think you have to adjust the strategy so that you're not bogged down in these kinds of situations moving forward. So,
yeah. Okay, let me simplify this because a lot of this is meandering and maybe I should have prepared a better answer ahead of time. But let me try to synthesize the point here. I think Again, what the left wants to do is turn this into a moral question instead of a political question. It's good versus bad versus what are legitimate political aims, versus what are illegitimate political aims. And I think the framing here is that you have to remind people that these are perfectly legitimate actions that ICE is performing. The underlying claim that the left is trying to make that this is illegitimate. Joe Biden let in 8 million illegals, millions more under completely dubious and reasons and using loopholes and abuses of the visa system and everything else. Donald Trump ran on reversing that action and ran on mass deporting the people who had been let in. He won the political contest. He won the Democratic contest. Okay, he got 77 million people to vote for him to do this precise thing. What he's doing, what the administration is doing, what ICE is doing is the legitimate political action. What the left is doing and trying to entice and encourage with people like Alex Pretti and people like the woman who was shot, Renee Good, thank you, is to establish that what Trump is doing is illegitimate and that these people are the force of legitimacy here and the force of order. And in fact, it's the exact inverse. Okay. And I think that's the operative question here. Not so much like the minute by minute, frame by frame details of what happened in the shooting.
If you're enjoying this episode of Rufo and Lomez, make sure to follow us on all the social media channels, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Instagram, to get the latest clips and full episodes. Okay, and this is the perfect segue to the next story that I wanted to talk about, which was a big cover story style essay in The Atlantic titled, "Yes, It's Fascism" by Jonathan Rauch, and the subtitle being, "Until recently I thought it a term best avoided, but now the resemblances are too many and too strong to deny." And so and normally, look, I don't read The Atlantic, but I got a Google alert because I'm one of the people named in this piece. And so I feel like I have the right to respond.
Yeah.
And it made the rounds among the usual kind of hyperventilating, blue sky social crowd, but it also was being adopted by many people on the center right, the so-called principled conservatives, who have, framed their opposition to Trump, now dating back 10 years, as, Trump is violating conservative principles. And now they're just joining the tribe up the escalator towards the ultimate epithet. Yes, it's fascism. And like, what is fascism? What is communism? We're playing with these World War II metaphors. Neither really exists. There's not really any communism. There's not really any fascism anywhere in the world. But these are kind of rich categories. And part of that conflict is, as you're talking about, the conflict between chaos and order. We saw that throughout the 20th century in these battles. And so what do you make of this? I mean, on the surface, okay, we can reject it. It's silly. It's ahistorical. It's not a serious argument. But going a little bit deeper, why do they continue to make this argument for 10 years? Are they going to be successful in smearing the president and his supporters with this? And why is this seeming to gain a little bit more ground now?
It's an interesting question. And one notable element of this essay you sent me, and when I first saw it, I kind of rolled my eyes, and it's like, here we go again, what is Jason Stanley cooking up this time? What is the, Jacob Urowski professor of, whatever at Yale? But it's not. It's Jonathan Rauch. That's interesting. Do you know Jonathan Rauch? Did you know of him previously?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but yeah, I've seen him around over the years.
So for people who don't know, like the name to me, all I remember him is like the gay marriage stuff. Okay. He was like the big sort of like centrist, smart, sophisticated proponent of gay marriage who famously convinced George W. Bush that gay marriage was important. That's just, I don't know what, it's context. It's maybe some meaningful context here. I think, okay, when it comes to why fascism, I have maybe there's 2 or 3 reasons why I think they continue to ride this hobby horse. One is that it elevates the threat. Okay, which is the obvious thing. Fascism implies anti-fascism. Okay, it gives a kind of motivation and justification for these aggressive, antagonistic elements on the left. And when you lose the Democratic contest, which we talked about last time, okay, so you've lost the Democratic contest. Trump wins. Trump wins based on all the things he's doing now. These aren't new. This isn't something that comes as a surprise to anybody. This is what he said he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And if you lose the Democratic contest, well, then you have to somehow invalidate Trump as a figure of Democratic politics. He's something else. And if you can turn him into something else, and the more exotic, the better, then you can justify these undemocratic counteractions in order to stop him. Okay, so you get fascist gives justification to the anti-fascist. I think there's also this sense in which the right and the left, or the sort of conservative right and the sort of more centrist left, are always in this tug of war trying to claim the mantle over who defeated communism on the one hand and defeated fascism on the other hand, going back to like the post-war years in the 1950s. It was very important for liberals to believe, and you know, we always think like, you know, the Curtis Yarvin thing, the liberals have always been these like Marxists, but they believed they were like the centrists, okay, the center, the moderates. They defeated communism and they defeated fascism, and they want to continue to be able to make that claim that they are this faction sitting in the center who's going to sort of hold everything together. That's certainly someone like Jonathan Rauch is very important to him, like Brookings Institute person.
Yes.
And so I think you get a lot of that kind of rhetoric. And so, yeah, it's a way to inflame and amplify the threat level. It's also a kind of LARP. I mean,
totally a LARP.
I think there's like a lot of, there's like, I love this woman. She's very kind, a friend of my, a mother of one of my friends. Okay. And she's like this, exactly like the kind of upper middle class liberal woman you would imagine who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. And like, she goes to these No Kings rallies. And I remember having this conversation with her, and she looks at me and she's like, you know, I'm an anti-fascist. And I was like, oh God, that is like, it's such a like funny thing for this like 70-year-old like boomer woman, upper middle class boomer woman who's like has millions of dollars of net worth and so on and so forth. To call
but she's
herself
also like reading romance novels where they're like banging the Minotaur or whatever, you know?
She might be past that. I don't want to,
No
you know,
way,
like
man.
I said, I have very fond
peaks
feelings for this woman. She's a close friend.
In the 60s and 70s, man.
Yeah. But like, they want to, it's important for the readers of The Atlantic. Okay.
Yes.
The kind of person who like sees this or like, you know, is going to be picking up a magazine of that kind and is doing this sort of performative political intellectualism to be able to say to themselves, I'm doing something important. I'm fighting like this existential battle for the you know, the soul of America is on the line here. And so it is just it's sort of like fan service. Now, I don't want to say that doesn't mean they take it seriously. Again, they take it seriously. But I think that, and also historical ignorance. Okay. Like this is just like an interwar European phenomenon. But they don't really seem to care or know that. It doesn't really matter. But I have to say the last thing, and I'll let you chime in here. The right kind of used to do this too. I mean, Joda Goldberg had his like liberal fascism book, and you know our colleague Glenn Beck used to do the billboard or the you know the chalkboard with the fascism thing. So yeah, I mean this isn't a one-way street.
Yeah, we're guilty of appealing to the heroic past. Of our brave anti-communists of the 20th century. Yeah, I mean I think there's a psychological and emotional cause here, and I've like ran into No Kings protesters. I ran into one of the No Kings protests this past weekend. I was taking my oldest kid to orchestra. I ran into one in Hood River, Oregon, this like idyllic mountain kind of river town between the mountain and the river in Oregon, early in the Trump administration. And you get like a sense of the psychology and the emotionality of it. And I think the liberal has a desire to feel fear. And there's some deep-rooted desire to create a fantasy that creates a sense of fear, deep fear, and then also justifies their most kind of violent instincts, right? Mm-hmm. And you get a sense of that. And I remember even earlier this year when I was doing some reporting on the Somali fraud, I went to go see George Floyd Square. How was George Floyd Square doing? And it was two liberal women. They were telling us about the No Kings protest they were going to go to. They didn't inquire about who we were, why we were there. And I asked them, why are you here? What did you want to come see? And they were going to like a martyr's shrine. And they said, I'm going to the No Kings protest because Trump is an incipient fascism is coming. Yeah. They're going to take away our kids. I have a trans son, and Trump is going to like kidnap my child, and he's been tearing down all the progress we've made. And I said, oh, really? Like, what specific items of progress have been made here in Minneapolis that Trump has reversed. And of course, she had no answer.
Yeah.
But you got the sense that she was almost in an erotic way, let's say, very hot and heavy for this fascism. And so, there's even this movie, One Battle After Another, that plays with this theme in a totally terrible way. But there is something there. They have, after the Cold War, America lost its enemies.
Yeah.
Abroad, and then therefore had to create domestic enemies just to feel something. And so you get the idea that the liberal is totally deadened with the liberal lifestyle, let's say. Hedonistic lifestyle, the endless brunch lifestyle, whatever. You and I have both been there. Like there comes to a point where you're like, okay, this is not enough. I need to do something else. And one escape for the liberal is this escape into either 50 Shades of Grey or the political equivalent, which is, Donald Trump as a fascist.
Yeah.
We know you're fans of the Rufo and Lomez show, but there is much more great content available on the Blaze. We have awesome hosts, great programs, and analysis you won't get anywhere else.
Blaze TV is the place to go to get the real story behind the news. Go subscribe to Blaze TV. Join Blaze TV today at blazetv.com, Rufo and Lomez, and get $20 off right now. For as low as $8 a month when you join our annual plan, you can be a part of a movement that isn't just watching history, but shaping it for the next generation. So, there's this other thing.
Is that wrong? Is there truth to this? Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I guess,
maybe not your friend's mom. Let's take it easy on her in particular.
No, it is true
general.
in that case. It's purely emotive. But then that's like, why? Why is this such an attractive sort of emotional valence to take on? And one is they don't want to believe that what Trump is doing they have to believe that it's outside sort of the traditions and precedents of American politics. So they have to find some way to attach some alien sort of imported ideology or stylistic element to it. And again, like, people are just sort of like historically ignorant. They have a script and there's like 5 things in the script that they can pull from at any given time. And their entire worldview is reduced to, taking these 5 items and mapping them on to the hundreds of different kinds of things, these different sort of impulses that are available to them in everyday life. And so like fascism, Hitler, okay, it's just this thing that they can grab and then place on top of Trump as a substitute for understanding that what Trump is doing is perfectly in line with Americanism, American politics. And actually, this is it's
completely normal. Yeah.
There was an article, this is from Jacobin, I don't know. It's the beginning of this term. It's this guy, Daniel Besner, who's a historian. And maybe it was the last term. Anyway, it was response to the kind of Jason Stanley hyperventilations about Trump being a fascist. And from the left, he's from the left of all this saying, no. What Trump is doing is like perfectly in line with American politics. FDR has extended the executive power in this way. We had mass deportations of Mexican. There was like literally like the Mexican Deportation Act. It wasn't called the Mexican Repatriation Act. Okay. Like forced,
Eisenhower.
like forced deportations of citizens, by the way. Okay. Like the
internment camps of the Japanese and the Italians.
Stuff, yes.
Yeah.
And even stylistically, like everything that Trump is doing is perfectly and this is like my disagreement with Curtis too, Yarvin, that is, where he's saying, okay, this guy's saying this is fascism and this is some alien imported thing, and Curtis saying what we need is some alien imported like monarchy. And I'm sitting here with the Jacobin writer going, no. This is all perfectly consistent with Americanism, and that's good. Now, what the Jacobin article guy says is this is Americanism, and this is why Americanism is bad. Okay, this is why like our
and you're looking to say, wait, this is awesome. We can just do this.
Yeah,
fantastic.
We can do this. The executive actually does have a lot of authority within the Constitution, and we can do all sorts of stuff. And actually, our borders can be secured, and actually, we can deport people who don't belong here, and so on and so forth. And okay, so I think I think there's a lack of sort of historical understanding. But I do want to say this before we move on to the next topic. I'm curious about this from your perspective. Is like, all right, this got me thinking, like, could you make a kind of steelman case that this is sort of fascistic in some way? And what would that look like? And, you know, Ernst Nolte, the historian who wrote about fascism, basically made the argument that fascism was just this counter-revolutionary imitation of Bolshevism. Okay, it's reactive. So you have this Bolshevist sort of populist authoritarianism from the left, and what the response to that is a kind of populist authoritarian impulse from the right, and that's all fascism is. Now, it's hard to sort of remove it from this interwar period, but I don't want to it's like, you know, the Champagne thing, like, you know, it's sparkling populist authoritarianism. It's not from like the interwar Europe region or something. Like, we can still talk about this stuff, and I guess maybe
no, there's no way, because look, you cannot have fascism inside the United States Constitution. It's just impossible. Fascism is also a revolutionary political program that seeks to erase the spirit of the modern kind of Christian, democratic, constitutionalist society, and then bring back a kind of pagan greatness that then goes out forth in the world and crushes all of the enemies through extrajudicial mob violence, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I mean, fascism is a particular thing. We don't want fascism. We don't have any native tradition of fascism in the United States. And even in Italy, a country with which I'm very familiar, you know, fascism is like, it's dead. It cannot be resurrected. It was a creature, even within the country that invented it, of its own time. And it was entirely dependent on communism. So Mussolini, of course, was a communist, actually a very successful communist newspaperman, before he became a fascist.
Right.
And the idea was, no, we don't want to have international communism. We want to have a nationalistic socialism that is, you know, kind of the pride and strength and masculinity of the Roman past brought forth into the 20th century. And so it's a particular political phenomenon that cannot exist because A, it could not exist in the United States. We have a different precursors. But B, it can't even exist in Europe because history has moved on. And after the Cold War, the idea of fascism, I mean, we may have authoritarianism in the future. That's always, tyranny is the eternal temptation, the eternal political risk. But it's not fascism, and I think it's just very lazy to try to make these old historical arguments.
It's incredibly lazy, and I'm broadening the definition here. But what I want to try to find is, like, are there some useful sort of cyclical historical analogies or sort of consistent trends that we're seeing play out again? And because you have over the last 10 years. A quasi-revolutionary sort of leftist project that is attempting to rewrite the sort of fundamental identity and history of what the United States is, and is also trying to displace like its population in the sense that its core population becomes incidental. This is now just a place for everyone. And what Trump is a counter-revolutionary force against that. Okay. Is that an appropriate way of framing what's happening? I mean, because the thing is, so the idea would be that the right is fundamentally reactive to the left. And what they're doing is extending the definition of fascism to mean a kind of style of resistance to that destructive tendency of the left. And when I say this, I'm not being hyperbolic about the left. The left fundamentally says that we are living within we're sort of hemmed in and constrained by an architecture of, you know, physical, political, economic, social, even biological, these constraints that are moreover imposed on us by an oppressor class who is like getting something out of us. And what the left is a kind of liberatory framework that breaks apart those constraints. Okay. It's destructive in that way, like referentially destructive in that way. And the right, broadly speaking, is a counter reaction to that, is an attempt to maintain those structures, to sort of maintain order against those destructive impulses. So, to the extent that what we just experienced was this effort to a kind of Marxist effort to deconstruct American society, does it make sense to then say that this is a equivalent counterforce? And if so, does that fit? And the problem is, like, you can't take out the emotive part of this language. Like, fascism just means bad, so it's not useful for this. But can we say in some sense that there's some like equivalent thing happening here, that what happened in the interwar period?
Yeah, I mean, you can make a general left-right categorical analysis going back to the French Revolution, right? So you could draw some analogies from the French Revolution, the left, the right, the kind of radical, rationalist, destructive force, people who wanted to maintain tradition, religion, monarchy. Then you could fast forward to the 1910s, the Bolsheviks, you can read that material, then to the fascist, communist kind of interplay and dynamic. But at a certain point, you're getting at something that the labels they reveal less than the underlying dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Which is chaos versus order, change versus tradition, et cetera, et cetera. I actually would root it a little bit deeper, and I would say what Trump is doing is a restoration of American principles that have been under significant revolutionary threat, in the same way that the American colonists organized their rhetoric about the American Revolution against the crown. And I would also, just from a scale standpoint, I think we should not be even really tempted to engage in this debate and taking it seriously, because the most likely outcome, from what I can see, and having a pretty good window into the administration, the most likely outcome of at the end of this year, at the end of the term, is going to be that Trump's actions and the administration's actions were insufficient to reverse the gains of the radical left in the culture, in the institutions, on demographics. And so, fascism worships the cataclysm. They're always looking for that cataclysm. And in fact, Trump is trying to do the opposite here. He's trying to stave off the chaos and trying to organize within the democratic tradition and achieve his goals in a system that is really stacked against him. And my fear is not that he goes too far. My fear is that he doesn't go far enough. That seems to be the most likely outcome. Yeah,
okay, that's fair. I mean, I'm doing a bit of like sophistic, word selling here.
It's good.
Like
The professor hat is on.
Okay. Yeah. No, I get. Well, this is the thing too, which I always say is actually like everything Trump is doing is totally normal, and I'm not saying that just from like a rhetorical standpoint because it like helps sort of support my own politics or position. It's just he's actually an incredibly normal politician, and his policy preferences and the things he's trying to accomplish are incredibly normal. And again, this is why that the Jacobin writer is right. All of this sits firmly and without any ambiguity within not just the American tradition, but the recent post-war American tradition. Okay, none of this is abnormal. None of it is alien. None of it is exotic or imported or anything else. This isn't like Putinism coming to America's shores, which is what they want you to think. This is very normal. This is a normal American administration with a normal American president doing normal American presidential things.
So for the last point, though, I would like to maybe play devil's advocate a little bit, and something that has bothered me. I think rhetorically, though, the Trump administration has often given ammunition to this argument, even at the level of the Department of Homeland Security Twitter feed, which has, the let's say, Greco-Roman statues with the, subversive synth music and the very, let's say, classically charged sloganeering that clearly is trying to convey a sense of strength, state violence, mastery over the physical domain. And so I think that while that plays to a certain demographic online, let's say, it is not really part of the American tradition, but strikes aesthetic notes that play into the left's critique. And so there's a certain fun that you can have when you're doing battle with your political opponents by taking on their epithets and embracing them and turning them against your opponent. But you have to do it in a way where everyone else is in on the joke. And I think as far as rhetorical and sometimes social media, and we can play on the screen some of the examples. This is a mistake because they are feeding into, let's say, on occasion, imagery that the left could then point to and say, look, this is like proto-fascist or postmodern pastiche of fascist imagery. And again, I don't think it is that. I don't think the policy is that. But it strikes me as something where you need a bit more discipline. And even from an aesthetic point of view, you want to have a very American aesthetic, not a very European one.
Yeah, I mean,
is that fair?
Man.
Would you say you've seen the posts?
No, I'm gonna cuck here. I agree.
I knew you would.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think all right, look, I've had these arguments with friends of mine before, and it's like, and I think part of this is a kind of personal evolution, and then you take your own personal sort of way of being as a political actor and want to sort of impose that. It's just sort of natural to want to see that represented elsewhere. And so it's, you and I have talked about this, the transition from being a kind of insurgent force to being in charge and what that entails. From going from the political standpoint of being an outsider who has to kind of, we were faced with this very ossified sort of media messaging environment, not just from the left, but on the right too. And if you wanted to get the kinds of things done that Trump's getting done, if you wanted to have a more robust right in America that was going to fight and be a little bit more focused on some of the things they're focused on, like immigration, you had to break through that ossification, that stale way of being on the right. And the Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney style, forget the policies for a second, just that style was a dead end. It wasn't going anywhere. Okay, so you punch through it with the flashy images and the memes and everything else. Well, now you're on the other side. Okay, now you're the guy running the account. Okay, so now what?
For the government,
Now the question: do you keep posting the same images? And Chris, I agree with you. The answer is no. You're in a different place now. We're in a different place now. And I get now the argument I think they would make is twofold. One is you have to signal to the people that got you there, I haven't abandoned you. We're not going to go back to being the same old Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, right? This is the new boss isn't the same as the old boss. Now, the way I think you do that is you demonstrate that through action. But, these things take time. It takes time to sort of stack wins on the board. And in the meantime, you have to continuously signal, we're doing it. We're on your side. We haven't forgotten where we came from. We haven't forgotten what's important to us. And also, we are not going to be cowed by the liberal establishment who wants us also to, in other words, I see Mike Cernovich make this argument all the time, and I agree with him. You cannot let the left dictate the terms by which you present your arguments and do your politics. The point here is not to please the editorial board of the New York Times. And too often we've been in situations where people on the right have made that mistake, where their focus, their target, political victory for them is getting the approval of the editorial board of the New York Times. So you don't want that. You don't want to fall into the trap where that becomes the goal. And so, okay, we're in this. I'll try to play both sides of this. I think we agree on where this needs to go. You need to, like, by the way, the reason why did the left fail? Why did the left lose the mandate of the American populace at large? They abdicated their role of being responsible, okay,
yes.
of being sort of smart and prudent and saying no to stupid ideas. And they got deranged.
But also they let transgressive symbols become their dominant focus instead of delivering tangible political goods.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so we should avoid that as well. Yeah.
We do need to avoid that, but I'm a little bit, so, we're in a transition phase. Well,
I'm glad to see that you're becoming the reasoned, sensible moderate I always knew you could be. Yeah,
I always have been.
This is middle age.
I'm just a mainstream Republican, man.
I am very normal. Yeah. So a return to normality. I think that is a great note to end on. And look, the other thing is results. You have to deliver. I don't really care what memes you're posting as long as you're posting big numbers on all the things that matter. So I'm sure this will be, look, this is not going to be the last time we talk about this. Minneapolis, the curse will come again. And so I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I hope folks are listening, and we'll talk to you next week.